Hello, STS Nation, and welcome back to the Geographic Profiler. Today, I am excited to have Steve Ryan on the show. With 30 years of policing experience, Steve is a former detective sergeant for the Toronto Police Service, working in both the homicide and sex crimes units. Currently, Steve is a crime analyst and reporter for CP24, a leading media outlet in the Greater Toronto Area. His biography, The Ghosts That Haunt Me, can be found on audiobook or in print. Today, Steve and I will be discussing several of the cases he worked on while in the Toronto Police Service. Steve, welcome to the show.
My pleasure, and thank you for the invite. So I always wanted to be a homicide detective, even when I was a young kid. And I mentioned in the book, there was a case here in Toronto back in the 70s. Emmanuel Jacques was an 8-year-old boy, a couple years younger than me, I believe, at the time, and he was murdered at the Yonge and Bloor. It was known as the Shoeshine murder case. And that rocked the city of Toronto. And I remember back then the effects that it had on my mom and dad and the people that I grew up with, because we weren't allowed to do certain things because everybody in the city was a suspect for the next child abduction. Thankfully, we don't have child abductions as routinely, but it certainly was a case that rocked the city. And since that time, I was fascinated with homicide work. And when I got hired by the Toronto Police as a young cadet, as a 17-year-old, my goal was to get into homicide as quickly as I could because I wanted to continue that sort of police work and that type of investigations.
17 years old. Is that still the minimum age? Are you allowed to start at 17 these days, or is it 18 now?
So back in the day, we had the Toronto Police had a cadet program, which was an apprenticeship where you wore a police uniform. You had cadet under your the logo of the Toronto Police. You didn't carry a gun, and a lot of our duties were riding shotgun, just learning, apprenticing, and we rode the Harley Davidsons and rode a lot of parking tags and cleared the rush hour. So it was a good way of getting to know what policing was about. And it was a way for the job to evaluate you as well. And then when you turned 21, you went off to Elmer, Ontario, and that's where all of the police applicants go when they're hired by a police service. And then you pass that, and then you're sworn in the province of Ontario as a police officer. So you couldn't carry a gun until you were 21. That was challenged a few years ago. So there is no cadet program per se, but you can now be hired as a constable as an 18-year-old. I'm not so sure how many police services hire 18-year-olds to carry firearms, but now the law is 18 and you can become a cop if you're hired as one.
That cadet program sounds interesting. I never knew it existed. I'm 41. I don't think it existed in my time. I'm not sure, but yeah, it sounds like a great program.
If they paid you well, you paid into a pension back in the day, and that's how I was able to leave the job prior to my 50th birthday with the full retirement benefits because I had accumulated enough years because I started so young. So yeah, it was a great opportunity to see what policing was all about. So that was my only career. That's the only job I ever had. I grew up playing competitive baseball and hockey, toyed with a scholarship when I was playing baseball and hockey, but I got hired as a cadet and I took on that role instead. And my whole life has been law enforcement. It's the only job I know, aside from what I'm doing now, of course.
Right. And your job now is obviously related. Instead of investigating the crimes, you're reporting on them.
Yeah, thankfully, I was given the opportunity to work for CP24, Bell Media's a sister station, and we report in the GTA with regards to everything newsworthy. And my job is to report on crime. So when a crime happens, I'm sent out to provide analysis as to what the crime might be, or I'll go in studio and chat with the anchors, the reporters inside, and we'll discuss that crime or other hot topics of the day as well. So I get a chance to share my lived experiences in policing with our viewers. So it is an honor actually to be able to talk to our viewers on a daily basis and provide my analysis as to what I believe is going on.
Is that something that that media outlets look for when they hire on a crime reporter? Is somebody who has that law enforcement background?
I think so, and it's not common. I know CP24 wasn't the first ones to do it. A former colleague of mine who worked for the OPP, Cam Woolley, he was the trendsetter. So he was hired on. He came from 30 years of policing in the OPP. He became a big personality in the city of Toronto with regards to crime reporting and reporting on traffic, reporting on the mechanics of a vehicle. He was quite an expert in all those fields. So they laid the groundwork. We are very successful at it because I am able to provide, I spent 15 years in homicide, so I can give an analysis on a situation where most reporters don't have that luxury because they've never lived that job.
In introduction, I mentioned that you worked homicide, you worked in the sex crime unit. What other roles did you play within the Toronto Police Service? What types of crimes did you investigate?
So I spent 20 of my 30 years investigative, 15 years in homicide, 5 years in sex crimes. Before that, I was in a traffic unit because we were trained riding the motorcycles. When we came out of Elmer as cadets as 21-year-olds. We went back to traffic units initially. So I was an enforcement motorcycle officer for a couple of years. I became a breathalyzer technician. So I dealt with impaired drivers for a few years as well. Then I got a couple of years in divisional experience going from call to call as a uniform. And I worked in the local detective office, where local detective offices basically, they investigate break-and enters, your thefts, your assaults. Anything bigger than that will go to a squad, like sex crimes if it was a sexual assault, homicide, hold up if it's a robbery. And then I got promoted fairly quickly after about 7.5 years. Spent a year in uniform as a uniform sergeant, and then was changed ranks to detective and was in sex crimes for 5 years, where I really learned the job of that specialty skill when it comes to investigating a specific crime. And then from sex crimes, I was able to transfer into homicide, and that's where I finished my career.
What's the process to become a detective? Is it experience? Is it an exam? How would somebody go about becoming a detective once in the Toronto Police Service or any police service?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can speak for Toronto. It's a promotion. You're a constable when you come out of Elmer. You've got to get your year's experience as a constable, and then you write promotional exams. You go through promotional interviews, and if you stay in uniform, you become a sergeant. If you go out of uniform, you become a detective. Now, if you are in an investigative office and you haven't been promoted, you're a detective constable. So that gives you experience in the investigative role. Then you're promoted. You go back as a detective or a sergeant, and then you would just go from there. So I went down to the sex crimes unit as a detective. Spent 5 years, got involved in some very high profile serial sexual assault here in the city. And then I went into homicide, and I got promoted in the homicide squad as a detective to a detective sergeant. And that was the rank I was satisfied with. And that's where I stayed, because I almost felt like that was my calling. It's almost addictive, if I could use such a term, when it comes to homicide investigations, where you're not only chasing these killers, trying to identify that the proverbial needle in the haystack, but you also find this connection with families as well. And that's a connection that you just can't let go, whether it's families of a sexual assault victim or the families of a murder victim. Being surrounded by that is something that I was drawn to, as difficult as that could be on your own home life, personal life, but your own psyche. It was something that I was drawn to. And I used the word addicted in my book, I do believe. But it was the type of work that I surrounded myself with and I was good at. That was how I was best serve our community, and that was to be a homicide investigator.
Was that draw, that addiction, your motivation for becoming a crime reporter? Could you have seen yourself transitioning to a different career, a teacher or something else that's completely unrelated? Or was that a central part of who you were?
It's who I was. I believe it's how I've been defined. So it allowed me to step away from the everyday grief and heartache that a detective is subjected to. And this is not a pity party by no means. Every investigator goes through this, that grief and that heartache and just that dark shadow of everyday work, whether you're in the morgue, you're in the Crown's office, you're meeting with a family, or you're interviewing a homicide suspect. It was a chance for me to keep that side, but yet distance myself from the everyday heartache of it, and then give it more of an analytical approach to providing my insights as to what these investigators may be going through as they're now doing what I did for so long.
Maybe you can just tell us a bit about your book first, and then we can discuss some of the cases that you cover in your book.
Sure. So I investigated myself 150 homicides that I was in charge of, and I most likely helped out in another 100. So let's say 250 homicides that I was involved with. Not one is more important than the other, whether you lose a child to a random killer, if it's a domestic, or if your kid was involved in crimes, gang related, let's say. Every mom grieves the same way. So a death notification is never easy, regardless of what the circumstances are. In this particular cases, these were 6 cases that really, for me, were the epitome of evil. These were 6 women women who were just doing their everyday lives, and they were killed for being girls or women as a result of how things were interpreted, how they were seen. And these 6 cases were the epitome of grief, the epitome of absolute heartache that can be experienced in this big world of ours when there is evil trying to harm the innocent. And these were 6 innocent people who were killed just because. And I wanted to give them a voice, and not in a salacious way, but also kind of a selfish way. Me provide my own honesty as to how homicide investigated me as a man, as a dad, and as an investigator. So I had to be honest with myself, but yet I wanted to be very respectful and give these 6 lost souls a voice as to what happened to them.
And I saw that in your book, the openness, the honesty, and the passion and the empathy really came through. And I see that also in your social media posts. I saw some that you posted this morning as well from another tragic case in the Toronto area of a drunk driver. But that the empathy really shines through in the work you do, and I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for saying that, and it really is a big part, I think, of being an effective investigator. Aside from being tenacious and knowing the law the way you need to work within the rules to arrest these people who you're accusing of these horrendous crimes, but you also need to be sympathetic and empathetic to the entire process, not just to the Crown. Also respect defense counsel as well, realizing that they're not only defending this one person, they are defending a system. They are protecting you and I. If the cops come knocking on our door at 3 a.m. and dragging your son out of bed, you better play by the rules, and you better have the grounds to do what you're doing. And if you're going to ask the state to lock somebody up for a long, long time, you better know what you're talking about. So defense counsel play a key role in our adversarial system by holding a cop's feet to the fire, making sure the Crown proves its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I've learned that over the years as a homicide detective. It really isn't us against them. That's not the way a seasoned homicide detective sees it. You see it as a system that's got checks and balances in place that you need to act within, but yet you still need to have such empathy and sympathy for everybody involved. I'll give you a quick example. Mm-hmm. In an adversarial all of our trials are adversarial. You've got the Crown's prosecution on one side, victims' families, the cops, the officer in charge. On the other side, you've got the accused family, their friends. Nobody wins when there's a conviction. Nobody wins. You've got a family that's lost their loved one for 20 years, perhaps 25 years. And you've got another side who's never going to have closure because their loved one has been taken from this world. So it's not a case of who wins and who loses. It's not a case of closure. This is the best we have in our system, and that is to make those that are responsible be held accountable for what they've done. But it's not a case of winning or losing. And I say this all the time. Oh, the family must have closure as a result of this prosecution or this conviction. No such thing. No such thing as closure. It's just part of the system holding people accountable for what they've done. And that's the best we've got.
Yeah, I always tend to use the word resolution or try and find some resolution.
Yeah.
Rather than closure, because I agree with you. I mean, I can just imagine if I was a grieving parent, I don't think I would ever be able to find closure. So,
and on that note, I have said hundreds of times, I am always so, I don't want to say impressed, but just blown away with the eloquence and the poise and the dignity and the respect that family members have when they are called to provide statements to the police, or even more difficult, taking the witness box, testifying before a jury, and then being cross-examined by a defense counsel whose job is to poke holes in the Crown's case. So poised and so dignified every time. And you mentioned my tweet this morning. Jen Neville Lake was the woman who lost her family. She lost her 3 babies and her father hit by a drunk driver. That guy, I believe, served 3 years, and he's now out. Her husband killed himself as a result of the devastation. And you hear her talk at a Mothers Against Drunk Driving event with a crushed heart. She still has such poise and such class and dignity. And I've always been impressed by that. And oftentimes I'm left in amazement as to where they get that strength to do that.
To find this, to find the strength to advocate and spread awareness.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yes, as opposed to burying your head under your pillow and saying, woe is me, and I can never get out. And I don't know if I could do it, to be honest with you, but to get out there and advocate for others so they don't suffer like you did, I think it's remarkable.
The first case that we're going to talk about is the Holly Jones case. I mean, I remember it. I remember it in the media, and it stood out to me right away. I mean, I have a daughter a little younger than 10, but I have a daughter as well. And I wanted to discuss this case with you and get all your thoughts on it and your experience with it.
Sure. So that was one of the investigations where I wasn't in charge of the case. I was a young detective in sex crimes, and the Toronto Police have this policy. If there's a non-familial child abduction, which are rare, thankfully, but if it's confirmed to be a stranger-on-stranger abduction, homicide and sex crimes work together. So I was tasked as a young detective to work on the sex crime side of things with Mark Saunders, one of our former chiefs here in the city of Toronto. He was a detective in the homicide side of it, and we worked for 2 very experienced detective sergeants, Dave Perry and Ken Taylor. So they were the brains behind this task force, and we were the foot soldiers. I was sent out to follow up on many of the leads on this investigation. It was my first real first-hand look at the absolute carnage or the grief that a homicide brings to a family. And we worked on this case for weeks on end until we were able to identify. I say we, the team collectively, were able to identify the person responsible. That was a case too that knocked this city on its ass, because it was one of those cases where everybody can remember where they were when they heard the news, and then everybody was a suspect because we didn't know who it was. Again, it was that proverbial needle in a haystack, and everybody was peering out of their windows. Is it my neighbor? Is it the guy that's delivering my mail who looks sort of suspicious? Everyone became suspects because the whole city was concerned as to who was this monster and are they going to do it again?
Do you mind just giving us a little background on what happened in the case?
Sure. So Holly Jones, I believe, was 10 years old. She lived in the Junction area, Bloor and Perth, and she, in the early 2000s, had her friend over from school, and she decided that, and she was given permission by her mom to walk her friend home. Holly lived on the south side of Bloor Street. She walked across to the north side, north on Perth, dropped off her friend, and then was on her way home. And a guy by the name of Michael Breer, who lived on the north side of Bloor, had said to the investigators that he knew that day he was going to watch child pornography, and he was going to abduct and sexually assault the first young girl that he saw. So as Holly was walking south on Perth, to come home, he was walking north. He grabbed her by the back of her neck, spun her around, and said to her, "If you scream, I will kill you." And he walked her into his flat. He lived on the first floor of a house. He sexually assaulted her. Then he killed her, and then he dismembered her body and put that or left that in different parts of the city. And her remains showed up at different times of the week, of the month. And my job was then to go out with a forensic officer and document those remains that were being found, and then interview those that found them. It was a horrible time for the city. And as an investigator, my God, it was one of those things that you just never forget.
I put up a map here for those that are just listening in, and it just describes what Steve was saying, where Holly's house was, the offender's residence, and her friend's house, and the pins are approximate. But it just shows that was just under a half-mile walk, I believe. Steve?
Yeah, It was, and that's a key part in this investigation because the leads, Perry and Taylor, had information, and I believe it was from some, whether it was consulting with the FBI, or they had some information that statistically, if a child is abducted by a stranger, they don't live too far from where the abduction took place. So we had a controversial idea that worked, and that was that we, as the investigators, were going to go within a radius of 6, 7 square blocks, I don't remember now, and ask for consensual DNA from every male that lived in that area. And it was controversial. We had civil liberties groups that were complaining about, rightfully so, right? We don't live in a police state, but we had DNA on Holly's remains. We had to clear these people that we were canvassing somehow. And the only way to do it definitively was through consensual DNA. And we had the consultation of the Crowns. We had Chief Fantino, I believe, was our chief at the time. So he was on board. It was a big press conference where it was explained as to people in this neighborhood, this is what you can expect. An officer's going to come to your door. They're going to ask every male that lives in that house for a consensual buccal swab, a DNA swab of the inside of the cheek. And the results can only be compared to, and this was documented, only be compared to the homicide of Holly Jones. And then that evidence was destroyed. And if people refused, we had to come up with another way to clear them as being potential persons of interest or suspects.
The suspect did initially refuse, did he not?
He did. So we had some clues on the remains that were located throughout the city, and there was DNA. I believe it was under Holly's fingernails. So she fought this guy off as she was being sexually assaulted. I think there was DNA, other DNA on her remains as well. There was green carpet fibers found on her, and her body was dismembered. And some of her remains showed up on Center Island, which oddly enough is just behind me here. They washed up on Center Island. Others washed up on the shores of the lakeshore, just west of here. And fibers, and in the bags that were thrown in the bags, there were weights. So when the canvas teams were briefed by the investigators, they were told to, as you ask this person for DNA, use your observation skills as well. Look beyond that person. Is there green carpet? Is there weights in the background? Your senses. The feeling was that a crime scene like this was going to be a complete mess. And most people think that the way to get rid of any blood evidence is through bleach. That's just a common thought. So smell. Can you smell any evidence of cleaning products? And the two officers who knocked on Michael Breer's door did some fantastic work because he politely refused, but they could see beyond him, and they could see green carpet. They could see weights. They could smell the odor of bleach. So he was bumped up now as a person of interest as we continue to get swabs from all the other residents and investigate every other tip that came in. He had to be cleared somehow because he and others who refused, we couldn't just write them off as refusal. They had to be cleared. And we had to get a cast off DNA sample from him somehow to be able to compare that to the DNA evidence that we had as evidence as a result of the autopsy.
I thought the investigation was a great example of a complete investigative effort. The officers doing the canvassing and noticing those items in the background inside the person's apartment. You know, there was a geographic profiling element, but there was also an element of a luck, which I guess comes into a lot of investigations.
Yeah, well said. And I mean, like a sports analogy, to be good, you need to be lucky as well. So you put the efforts in, and you hope for the best. Again, that's all we have. Now, we did learn, I say we collectively, the Toronto Police, we learned lessons during that case as well. The day that it was confirmed that this was a non-familial abduction, a lot of us, the investigators, met at the corner on the south side of Perth and Bloor Street. And I believe it was garbage day. And now I'm going by memory, but I do think that Breer was watching us on the opposite side from his front window. And I recall it was garbage day, and he was making sure, I think he had put Holly's remains, some of her remains in a garbage bag, and he was
Mm.
waiting for the garbage truck to pick it up. And back in the day, the garbage in the city of Toronto was contracted out to go down to Michigan. So
Okay.
part of her body went down to Michigan. We did recover those remains because once he was arrested, we were able to send officers down there, and they were able to, by the grace of God, recover those remains that we lost. But what we learned then was anytime now, I believe, unless it's changed, I have been gone for almost 8 years. If you have an abduction like that and it's confirmed, garbage gets frozen. No garbage gets in, no garbage comes out, it gets frozen. And that's because of things like this. I do believe that he watched us, and if I remember correctly, he was waiting for, in anticipation, he was waiting for that garbage truck to pick up that garbage with her remains and take that off before we were able to even learn as to who he was or what his role was in the case. So like any investigation, I'm sure you're aware of this, you always learn something. The more
Sure.
experience you get, the more lessons you learn. And that's the same with testifying as well. There's never such thing as a clear-cut case, even a simple bar fight that you lay a manslaughter or homicide charge. There's always an issue of some sort, and you learn from that. And in this case, the lesson was learned. Garbage gets frozen. No garbage in, no garbage out. It just stays where it is.
We both know how difficult landfill searches are, so I think it's amazing that you were even able to recover those from the landfill in Michigan.
And that just goes to show you as well the efforts that the police will go through to give some relief, some answers to a family. When we had him arrested, he was charged now before the courts, but the cops don't give up. If there's evidence that is still, if the little girl's remains were in a Michigan landfill site, well, we're going to go get them. We're going to try to get them anyway. And God bless those officers that went down there, and they did get them. They retrieved them and were able to return them home to her family.
Tonight, the horrific 2006 double murder inside a downtown hotel and the clues that helped crack the case. CTV's Austin Delaney is live on Girard with more. Austin.
This was a real whodunit when it happened. There were 3 tourists found dead in the hotel behind me. The city was worried there was a tourist killer on the loose and tarnishing this city's good reputation. The 19th floor of the Delta Chelsea Hotel, as it was known in September of 2006, was covered in blood. A trail of it leading investigators from the elevator where the first body was found to the crime scene in room 1908.
By far the worst I'd ever seen. Walking into that scene looked like you were walking into, not to sound so cliche here, but looked like you're walking into a movie, a horror film.
CP24's crime analyst Steve Ryan was then the Toronto homicide detective leading the investigation into the discovery of 3 dead Swiss tourists. The male by the elevator was naked, wall by the elevator bloodied.
He was trying to hit the button. You could tell him he missed quite a few times because his fingerprint was all around the down button, but it did not hit the button. So you get that impression that he was panicking, trying to hit that down button to get away from whoever was attacking him.
Another male and female were found dead in the room. Ryan would soon learn the 2 in the room were friends and had booked a cross-Canada tour. But he harbored feelings for her, but she did not for him. The man by the elevator was the woman's new boyfriend, and they were all sharing the same room.
He could not stand the fact that he believed that there was intimacy going on in the other bed. He was in his bed, and that started a letter to his mother with regards to just how lousy he felt about the whole thing.
Ryan believes he put the letter down and then stabbed the 2. The coroner ruled it a double murder-suicide, but Ryan does not think the killer had the nerve to plunge the knife into his own chest. Instead, there were 30 to 40 small nicks on his chest.
What the guy didn't realize is that as he was doing these hesitation moves, he nicked the top of his own heart. It caused him to bleed out, but bleed out slowly. And I don't suspect he had any idea what was happening.
The former investigator believes the killer thought he would wait in the bed for police to come after the first body was discovered by the elevator. Instead, he killed himself, quite by accident. And in my latest episode of The Detective, a podcast with Steve Ryan released today, Ryan goes into much more detail how he solved the crime before Toronto's safe city reputation was ruined. Reporting live, I'm Austin Delaney.
All right, thank you, Austin. And you can subscribe to The Detective on iHeart or wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes are released every Monday, and you can visit our website for more details from the investigations.
I couldn't believe I hadn't heard of this case. I think I was down doing my master's in the States at the time, but I had never heard of this case. And what happened here, Steve?
That was the most horrific crime scene that I have ever seen when it comes to the uh, blood that was all over that room. So this case happened, I believe, during tourist season, and we had two Canadians that were killed in Mexico. A couple, I believe they were the Ianos, and when three tourists turned up dead here in the middle of tourist season in downtown Toronto, there was great concern by not only the senior command with the police, but also city officials as well. Did we have a killer running around killing tourists in these hotels? Because this was in the height of that tourist season. That hotel, the former Delta Chelsea, it was filled with people, top to bottom with guests. And on the 19th floor, witnesses heard a man screaming for help as he ran down the hallway naked. And that shot there was Austin Delaney, my former colleague, and I went back to the scene when we were doing the podcast for CTV. And he died at the elevator. And we had no idea as to where he came from. Is there somebody in the hotel responsible for this killing? Are there more? So I had the entire hotel frozen. Nobody was able to leave that hotel. And the majority of those people in that hotel at the time, we brought Greyhound buses in, TTC buses, and they were all interviewed one by one. We were able to trace through, it used to be called luminol back in the day, where you squirt the floor with this chemical, turn off the lights, and you just follow the trail. And it led us to room 1908, or the officers to room 1908. And then when they were able to open that door, they found a young woman who had a huge knife. It was inside of just below her abdomen. It almost went into the floor. It was that deep in through her. And in one of the two double beds was this man in shorts and a t-shirt. He's wearing his eyeglasses. There was a book on his chest. But what struck me right away was the directionality of the blood that was on his leg. It was drying going down his leg, as opposed to, as if you can picture, he's lying down. The blood was on the top of the thigh. It was dry going down to the back of his leg, as opposed to going down towards his ankles. And that struck me as odd, not to mention he had his glasses on and a novel in his hand. And this was what I perceived to be right away a personal homicide. That knife, it was more of a FU, right? And that knife was left inside of her. The room was wall-to-wall blood everywhere. No sign of a robbery. The suitcases were still in the room. Watches were on the nightstands. Jewelry was on the nightstands. There was no forced entry. So what happened was during the autopsy of the guy that was on the bed, he had multiple, what the pathologist, Dr. Palanin, was the chief pathologist at the time. I'm not sure if he still is or not. But he referred to them as hesitation wounds in and around the heart, the chest area right above the heart. And what I've learned through Palanin over the years was that as humans, we can kill ourselves multiple ways. But stabbing ourselves is one of those things that's very hard to do. We can hang ourselves, shoot ourselves, jump off of a balcony, overdose. But stabbing yourself is difficult to do. So this guy that was in the one bed, he had a love interest in his friend, the girl in the next bed, the deceased. They were from Germany or Switzerland, I believe, and they bought their tickets ahead of time to come over here to visit in Toronto. She had this new love interest, and she wanted to bring him along. So they didn't want to lose their tickets. So the guy who was responsible for the homicides, he agreed. And the three of them came over here. He was in one bed. The friend and her boyfriend were in the other bed. And he was pretending that he was going to kill himself. And he was nicking at his skin, just underneath the skin itself. And then he decided he had enough and he was going to kill them. Then the fight was on. The guy took off down towards the elevator. who died as a result of his stab wounds. The girl was still in the room, obviously died of stab wounds, and then he gave her a final knife into the abdomen. But what he didn't realize was that he nicked his own heart. So he lied down in the bed, put his glasses on, wrote a note to his mom, I believe, talking about how he couldn't stand watching what had gone on, and then he bled out. And it was one of the most bizarre cases I've ever come across, and it really highlighted the importance of. Well, I mean, we did find a note at the end of the day, which was, that's a no-brainer at that point. But up until that point, what stood out for me, and I used to lecture on this as well, is reading crime scenes, looking at the directionality, looking at the flow of blood, dried blood. What if it's flowing in one direction? What's the reason for that? The cast off blood on the ceiling, that speaks volumes as well. So all of that put together, and we learned that that's what happened. He killed the two of them, not realizing that he nicked his own heart, and then he bled out on the bed while just before the investigators were called to the scene. Yeah, it was a strange case.
And when I was reading your book, I was wondering, as I was reading through that case, is he taking his own life, or is he staging it to look like he was attacked too? That's kind of what I was thinking as I was reading through your.
Yeah, and they're great questions. What I believe happened though was he was pretending, trying to get her attention. I can't stand this. I can't stand it. So he's taking his little nicks. He's not really intending to stab himself in the heart. But then that moment when he just lost it, killed the two of them, his heart started to pump and he bled out himself unintentionally, is what we believe happened. But the hesitation wounds to the heart, I don't believe were any attempt at all for him to kill himself. It was just a show. Then that went to the next level. He killed two people and then he bled out because he accidentally nicked his own heart.
I just want to back up quickly here. You mentioned that, there was the possibility of, there was a fear of somebody killing tourists. Was the fear that the two cases, the one in Mexico and here, were related?
Not that they were related, but they had the possibility of having the same effect, which would be tourists being killed brutally in the city of Toronto. So there was, I wouldn't say pressure put on us as the investigators, but there were people certainly wanted to know what's going on here. And we were very thorough. We interviewed most of the people, well, everybody that was on the flight with those three people coming over from Europe. We interviewed all of them. People remembered them being on the plane. There was no real recollection as to any sort of animosity, any animus at all. It happened the night they arrived when the lights went off. He went in one bed, they went to the other, and that's when he decided to go on this killing rampage.
I feel like anytime there's foreign citizens involved, there's added pressure on detectives such as yourself and law enforcement. I mean, just from a political level too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Yeah, well said. Absolutely right. And it's difficult as well because our communications have to go through Interpol, have to go through the RCMP, even to get personal information on those people. It's not, I don't want to say it's not as personal, if you will, because everything is arm's length where you're getting that information, and the information that you're feeding back is not the same. Whereas the detective, you would meet with a family and you sit down and tell them everything that you could possibly tell them without jeopardizing evidence in a case. And in this sense, we were giving it to a third party to relay, and the embassies helped us as well. But it was a unique investigation for sure. And yes, it does give that. There's always pressure in a homicide investigation, but when you've got other countries involved with their citizens, yeah, you better get it right. You better get it right. You better do your job properly, for sure.
Okay, let's talk about the case of, I might pronounce this incorrectly, Dr. Freak Shamji.
Yeah.
Dr. Pronouncing that correctly?
Shamji. Yeah. This was. Can I just say something here? We're talking about investigating cases, whether they're Canadian nationals or foreigners. When I first went into homicide, there was this huge, and I believe it's still there, this huge poster on the wall, and it said something to the effect of, "There is no greater honor for a police officer than be given the responsibility of investigating the death of another human being." And that always stuck with me. The responsibility is tremendous when you're getting answers for a family who's gone through the toughest of times, doing it within the law, presenting that case and factually to a jury, and if there is no jury, to a foreign embassy to tell them what had gone on. It's a tremendous responsibility. And I have the tremendous respect for homicide detectives around the world who go through that work day in and day out, because it can eat you up, man. It really can. But it's important work that needs to be done.
Tonight, the horrific murder of Dr. Alana Frick-Shamji and her killer's effort to cover up the crime. CTV's Austin Delaney reports.
It has been over 5 years since the murder of Dr. Alana Frick-Shamji by her abusive husband, neurosurgeon Dr. Mohammed Shamji. But the killing still haunts the lead detective who solved the case. Steve Ryan, now a crime analyst at CP24, says he feels someone in her circle should have spoken up about the ongoing violence in the home.
All of her friends, all of them doctors, highly educated, successful people, at the height of their careers as well, they knew or suspected that she was being physically abused by her husband, and they said nothing.
We recently visited a spot in Kleinburg, northwest of the city, where the body was found, stuffed into a suitcase and tossed over a bridge crossing the Humber River. Hey, Steve.
Hey.
So this is the case that ended your career, really, as a homicide officer.
It was, yeah, the last case where I decided I was not going to see I could not see another body in a suitcase, and I left the job within 5 months of this investigation.
He had just concluded the girl in the suitcase trial when this murder fell into his lap.
It was terrible. Yeah, it was a terrible case. It's hard to describe what it looks like when you see a human being stuffed in a suitcase. And to see that on a couple of occasions within a span of a few months, because of the case I had prior to when I was at trial, yeah, it was it for me. It was just that the grief was just too much.
Melanie Bittersingh's father and stepmother were both found guilty of murder. And in the Alana Frick-Shamji murder, her husband, the renowned Dr. Mohammed Shamji, took a plea deal. Life with no chance of parole for 14 years, sparing his daughter from having to testify as a witness to her mother's murder.
The one daughter in particular, her bedroom backed onto the closet of her mom and dad. So she heard the fighting that was going on. In fact, she came out of her room, stood into the entrance of her parents' room, and she saw her dad on the floor on his hands and knees. She couldn't see her mom, but she could see her dad. Her dad was between the bed and the window. So on his side, one side of the bed on the floor. I believe he was assaulting her or choking her at that point, the position that the daughter described that he was in at the time. So she said, "What's going on? Where's mom?" And her father said, "Go back to your room. It's okay."
The Shamji children, 2 young girls and a boy, now live with their grandparents on their mother's side. Ryan reached out to the grandmother at their new home in Windsor.
Anna, do they talk about their dad at all?
Never. They don't like to talk about it. They do talk sometimes, oh, you remember when we went out and we have this and that, and our father said that and that, but nothing in a positive way, they despise it, to be really honest.
They don't even ask which penitentiary he's serving his time. Austin Delaney, CTV News.
This case goes back to what you mentioned earlier in our discussion, that it's not, there's victims all around. And in this one, that really stands out, in that you have 3 children who lost both their parents that day.
Exactly. And that's, again, where there is no winners or losers. So this case highlighted even more so that domestic violence and homicide doesn't discriminate. You've got a world-renowned neurosurgeon who is coming up with all kinds of different medical procedures, traveled around the world lecturing. He had this successful wife who was a doctor herself. They ran marathons together, were taking photos all over the world together. Perfect life, you would think, but not so much. He was abusing her for years. And I talk about this. I've become a very big advocate of domestic violence. And I say this all the time. And again, this was highlighted as well in the mom who you heard me interviewing there on that podcast, the mom of Alana. The night that Alana decided that she was no longer going to be Mohammed's punching bag, and she was going to tell him that he was divorcing her, that she was divorcing him, sorry. Her mom, that lived in Windsor, which is about 4 hours west of here, I said to her, "Do you want me to come down with you to be with you when you serve him papers?" And mom said to me that Alana's words were, "Mom, he's not going to kill me." He's not going to kill me. So you can be a victim of abuse forever. The moment you say, I've had enough, I'm leaving, that's when the abuser loses that ability to control you. And it becomes, if I can't have you, no one can. And you can have all the education in the world, man. If that's how you're wired, that's what's going to happen. And I write in the book where this made media headlines across the city and beyond, because he was such a renowned doctor and he did some great work as a doctor, that call-in shows would be saying, we need him to perform these procedures. And the media got it wrong, in my view. They reported him as the brilliant neurosurgeon who killed his wife. But in fact, he's a murderer who happened to be a neurosurgeon. So those lines were blurred a little bit, in my view, as this case was being reported. And that was because of his status. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter. He was just as violent as somebody who had no education. And he was as conniving and as manipulative as the next monster, as he tried to discard his wife's remains north of the city and then act like nothing ever happened with regards to him. He went about it every day. He went to work the next day after she was reported missing and acted like nothing had gone on. But obviously it had.
And I mean, we see that all the time where offenders are glorified or shown empathy in media headlines. Star athlete commits this crime.
Yes.
Stand-up person in the community is charged with this crime.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you would hear, and I hate this term as well, this crime of passion. To me, that says that, and it typically it's directed at men who kill their wives. What that is saying indirectly is that we're a bunch of bozos who can't accept rejection. So you lose your shit and you kill somebody. It's not a crime of passion. It's murder. It's premeditated murder. This woman, his wife, successful doctor, wanted no more of this abuse. And it wasn't a crime of passion. He wasn't letting her go. And he was prepared to throw his entire career away, harm 3 of his young children at the time. And it didn't matter because that control was being taken away from him. So he was a murderer who did brain surgery. He wasn't this brilliant brain surgeon who happened to be a murderer. It was the inverse of that.
Was crime of passion, did that used to be a legal term in Canada, or is it still?
It's I wouldn't say it's a legal term, but it certainly does go to a sentencing right now when it comes to the heat of the moment. And I mean, the courts have said this. If you walk in on your partner who's having an affair, that's your crime of passion. You lose your ability to reason and you act out. I think that's nonsense, right? A crime of passion is just another wording or excuse for the motive of a murder. And being jilted by somebody who you pretend to love is not an excuse to kill anybody. So I don't like when that term is used, a crime of passion. I try to speak along these lines every time I hear that being reported. This homicide wasn't a crime of passion. I always say there's no such thing, man, as a crime of passion. It belittles, it minimizes the crime, number one, and it certainly belittles men. And I say men because 99% of domestic-related homicides are men killing women, their partners who are leaving them. And it just says that as a guy, you can't accept rejection. And I just think it's an excuse.
In your interview there that we just watched, and I'm not going to ask you to describe what it was like, but I can only imagine the emotional toll that must have on detectives, investigators coming across scenes like that, finding bodies in those situations.
So this was the last case that I investigated. And at that point, I was done as a homicide detective because when her remains were found up in York region, which was just north of the city, they were found by a fireman walking his dog. York Regional Police investigated it. It seemed obviously very suspicious because we were able to determine that we believe this happened in the city. We had jurisdiction. So seeing evidence of a human stuffed in a suitcase is just, it's life changing, to be honest with you, life altering, if you will. And I had just come off, and what I was referring to in that clip you played there, I was in cold case about a year and a half before, and we were able to, through some great work by the team that I was in charge of, solve a cold case that was dated back to the early 90s, where a little girl, a 13-year-old child, was murdered by her father and stepmother here in the city. They put her in a suitcase, drowned her in the lake just behind me here. There's an apartment building where she was murdered. They drowned her in a lake, took her remains up to York Region, and they put it in a garbage pit and set the suitcase on fire. And for almost 30 years, York Regional Police tried to identify who she was. She became known as the girl in the suitcase. And the reason why they couldn't identify her, it wasn't through lack of effort or any sort of technologies that weren't implemented. Nobody knew she was here. The only ones that knew she was here were her mom back in Jamaica, who thought that she was coming up here to Toronto to have a better life with her dad and stepmom. And then when they killed her, the dad and stepmom told mom in Jamaica that she had run down to the States and she may be on a track scholarship. So no one had any clue why she, who she was, why she was here. So all these artist sculptures, sketches of her were everywhere forever. I remember I was a young constable when this happened, and there was not one clue because she came from the airport to the apartment. She wasn't allowed out, and that's where she died. So just to tell you very quickly on that case, the stepmom went to her pastor in St. Catharines and basically confessed to the pastor as to what went on, but tried to do it to distance herself. She was tired of the husband, Everton Bittersing, the father, the biological father. He was hovering over her for decades. And I say this all the time. If you killed somebody and you think you've gotten away with it, you literally are sleeping with one eye open. And it can be exhausting. And this is a classic example because he didn't let Elaine, the stepmom, out of his sight forever. And she got tired of it. So she thought she could flip the script, tell on him, get rid of him, and she would be home free. The pastor contacted me. I then interviewed Elaine after we found a case in York Region that matched what she was describing. And here's where I talk about working within the law. The moment I went into that interview room with Elaine, who was the stepmom, she wanted me to give her a guarantee that what I'm going to tell you is it's truthful and it's brutal, but you need to promise me that I'm not in any jeopardy. And I couldn't. Now, if you are inexperienced as a homicide investigator and you want that information, yes, tell me what you've got. The moment I said to her, you're good, tell me what you know, she doesn't get charged or convicted of first-degree murder. And she gets away with the whole thing. And the courts found that she was actually the puppet master. She was the one that orchestrated the beatings of this 13-year-old child. So I couldn't guarantee her that. I said, I can't tell you that. I can't promise you anything. And then she hemmed and hawed for about 15 minutes on a video interview. And then she told me the story. And then we wound up charging both parents with first-degree murder. They were convicted, it was a boot fight in court for weeks on end. And then I go back on call after being in court, convicting these two bastards, then going back on call. And the first call I get is a woman in a suitcase. And that was it for me. After that, I couldn't deal with it anymore.
Is that a red flag for you as a detective when somebody asks for or implies that they're looking for immunity in some way?
Yes, absolutely, it is. Absolutely. Now, you can get immunity. You may know this, but that goes through what's called an induced statement. After you provide a statement and you might be charged, the Crown and Defense Counsel may say, okay, you won't be charged with this crime that these charges could be stayed, this crime that you've been charged with. You have to be full, frank, and upfront with the investigator here with this new statement. So it's an induced statement, which oftentimes it's a hard fight for the Crowns because the defense always say he's just telling them what they need to hear to get off on their own charges. So there is a way of getting around a statement that way in an induced statement sort of thing, but that's way above the detective's pay grade. And that's legalese with the Crown and the defense making this contract. But if somebody walks into my office or to a detective's office and says, I got something to tell you, but you need to guarantee me that I won't be charged, red flag, 100%. 100%. What I would do in a situation like that was, and you said, I don't know what you're going to tell me, and hypothetically, and I can't promise you that. And if that person doesn't want to talk to you, I'd get a surveillance team on them right away and find out where they're going, who they know, and then kind of reverse engineer it from there. But you cannot guarantee somebody complete anonymity. You can't guarantee them complete freedom from charges if you have no idea what role they played and what they're about to tell you. But you can see how an investigation can turn upside down quickly, or you can ruin your investigation if you're eager to get that information and just give them you anoint that, I promise you, no charges for you. And then out it comes.
One of the most famous cases out of Ontario is, the deal with the devil. So it dates back, right?
Yes.
With Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. So we all.
Yes. Yeah. And they were quick to, that's right. Again, lessons were learned in that case as well. I was a young detective at the time. And then when I went to sex crimes, a lot of what went on or didn't go on properly in those investigations, we learned from, and policies and procedures were put into place. But the Crown's office in that case, I know we're getting off topic here, but they were backed into a bit of a corner. And the psychology behind that, so I've been trained and told that attractive people, we want to be near, be associated with, and we want to believe them. You're an attractive person, we want to believe you. Carla Homolka was believed when she gave her sob story. And the Crown made a deal with her that the Crown couldn't go back on. Yes, these tapes were found, incriminating tapes were found after that deal was made, but the Crown's office works with complete integrity and transparency. And that's how we want it to be. So had they gone back on that deal and said, deal's off, we found tapes, that's going to ruin any other deal going forward. So the Crown's office had to stick with that. And I don't fault them one bit. They are an integral institution that is key in our judicial process. They made a deal with the devil. They had to stick to that deal despite of the evidence that they found. And a lot of that was because I believe during the investigation, she was an attractive person. They were an attractive couple. You want to believe them. So that's her story. You believe it. That's what happened.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you don't follow through, you risk setting a precedent.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
And your word is nothing when it comes to the next deal that could be struck because who's to say that you're not going to go back on that as well. I give you another quick lesson that as an investigator, I say we. I don't recall the exact car, but remember there was a big media display in St. Catharines at the time, and they were looking for, let's say, a red. I think it was a beige, but for the sake of argument, let's say we're looking for a red Camaro. Well, it wasn't a red car that they were actually looking for, and every red car had a sticker on it saying that it had been investigated by the police. It wasn't red; it was beige, let's say. But the reason why red became the color, the investigators at the time said, "The car that you saw, was it red?" And then, yeah, it's a red car. Now all of a sudden you're on this wild goose chase for a car that doesn't exist. And this is where we talk about open-ended questions, letting a witness give you the answers. Don't be putting any suggestions to a witness so that they can adopt, because they're going to send you in the wrong direction. Sure. That was one of the things that was learned with regards to a multi-jurisdictional investigation and interviewing people and getting accurate information from them as opposed to just information. And that's not a criticism of anybody. That's just lessons that you learn as a police agency. It grows with experience, and you get more and more of these type of investigations to conduct.
Let's move on to the final case that we're going to discuss here, and that's of the York rapist.
Our multi-platform series, The Detective, revisiting some of the crimes that shocked the city while hearing from one of the people at the center of those investigations.
Tonight, a series of sexual assaults 2 decades ago that sparked fear on the campus of York University, and the major mistake the suspect made that eventually led to his arrest. CTV's Austin Delaney reports.
In the year 2000, female students at York University's Kiel campus were gripped by fear.
Police now say the York U rapist is responsible for 8 sex attacks on campus since July 21st. The level of violence has escalated with each assault.
In a 3-month period, escalated from robberies and groping to a violent sexual assault.
He drags her over into the trees, demands her PIN number and her ATM card, and then he rapes her at knife point.
CP24's Steve Ryan was at the time an investigator with the Sex Crimes Unit and was heading a task force aimed at catching the man dubbed the York Rapist.
So Steve, this gas station's like 2-minute walk, really, a 2-minute run from where the rape happened.
Yeah, that's right. It's not too far from where the assault happened at all. So this was a key piece of evidence for us. So what we know, or what we found out, was that he came right to this gas station using the survivor's ATM card with her PIN number, and he made several attempts to get money out of her account.
And aimed at the ATM, a security camera, capturing the suspect's image. His picture was everywhere, on every newscast, and tips were flooding in. In one tip, the caller appeared to have inside knowledge of the wanted man.
So we get a call in the afternoon saying Philip Feremsky says he did it, and he's in Hamilton. Now we got to find Philip Feremsky.
They find Feremsky, who comes to the police station with his mom and agrees to a DNA swab.
So in this particular case, the officers came to me and said, we finished with Feremsky. He's downstairs with his mom. I thought, why not go down and let's see what he has to say.
So you open the door, and you've seen a picture of your wanted suspect from the gas station. What do you see there?
I was pretty much convinced it was the same guy.
The 18-year-old quickly confesses to the robbery, but says he did not sexually assault her.
And his mom said to me, and I'll never forget this, I'm paraphrasing, of course, whoever this person is needs to be caught. They're dangerous, and I worry about the students at the university. My heart basically aches for them.
Feremsky, who lived with his mom in a home close to the gas station and where her son's image was captured, and close to the university where the assaults were happening, soon confessed he was the York U rapist. The person who called the tip line remained anonymous. Feremsky took a plea deal and served 5 years in prison. Austin Delaney, CTV News.
I was a detective in the Sex Crimes Unit. This was the first case that I was in charge of when it came to a serial rapist. This guy, Feremsky, would hide. He hid out in a pathway at York University, which is in the north part of the city here. And he would, at knife point, full-on sexually assault students as they were walking along the campus. So this was a big deal for the city. It certainly was a big deal for the university as well, and for its students. This guy was the typical sexual assault suspect, somebody who was small in demeanor, very soft-spoken. There are certain levels of suspects who commit sexual assault, and one of them is almost an apologist, where as they're sexually assaulting a victim, they are apologizing for what they're doing. This is what he did. Victim said the same thing. This guy who I could have picked up and thrown, but he had a knife at my throat. So they were held. They felt helpless. So when we arrested him, we did a search warrant at his mom's place, and in the wall of her basement, I believe, was a cutout, and he had his sexual assault kit. He had trophies, whether it was undergarments or some evidence that he took from the scene. He had a mask, he had a knife, he kept it all together in a neat little package, and it was put inside the wall. And we found that during a search warrant of his mom's place.
And did he have a past criminal record, or did he have no record?
No record at all. No record at all. No, we were able to identify him based on another canvas that shows you how important canvases are of that area, where he was seen using one of the ATM cards. I believe it was one of the ATM cards of one of the victims that we were able to capture on video surveillance, and we just went backwards from there. So as you heard in that clip, he said, yeah, I robbed him, but I didn't sexually assault him. Well, there was DNA. So once we were able to get a DNA warrant to confirm that, in fact, he was the person responsible. That is, too, one of the hardest things, aside from a death notification, which is not like television. Death notifications, you knock on a person's door at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're the on-call team, saying a homicide, you and your partner show up, freshly showered, your suit is pressed, your tie matches your shoe, your polished shoes, and you smell like a bar of soap. You just got out of the shower, and you knock on the door, and the family opens that door, and you say, "Are you the mother of or the father of?" They say yes. You hit them right between the eyes, and then you deal with the fallout from that notification, and that is the hardest thing in the world to do. And I would say next to that is sitting down with a victim of a sexual assault and having them relive those horrific details step by step by step to two complete strangers on video and recall what they've lived through. The two most difficult things to do in policing, in my view.
Before this attack that occurred, and you had the footage, and you canvassed and you found the footage of using the ATM card, where where were you going with the investigation? Were you looking at spatial behavior in terms of where the attacks occurred? How was the investigation moving on?
Yeah, spatial behavior was a big part of it because it was a proverbial monster hiding in the bushes. This guy literally was hiding in the bushes, waiting for the next victim to come by. So that was a big part of the investigation. The geographics as to the person who committed that offense, again, we were advised most likely lives in that area or passes through that area on a regular basis. He didn't just pick that area and decide to. So we worked on this geographical theory that he wasn't driving. The suspect wasn't driving an hour out of his way to pick that spot. It was convenience for him. And true to that, he lived a stone's throw away from that path, from that gas station where he took that money out. It was all within that same area, as is the forensic psychiatrists that we would consult with, and they would tell us to when you do a profile of some sort, the person that's most likely going to be small in stature, somebody who may have issues at home, soft-spoken because he's got this big knife. And when you analyze the statements of these sexual assault victims, they talk about how he was actually he was apologizing for what he was doing to them. So we were able to build a profile on that. And of course, it's not evidence, but it helps you in your direction of your investigation. And then when we identified him, and I interviewed him, I was able to work off of what I knew to try to get more information from him. And then when we did that search warrant, looking for the knife, looking for the souvenirs, if you will, that he kept, he had it all. He did not throw any of that away because that was his power, right? That was his kit. That's what, and what he kept in that bag with regard to the undergarments, that was his reward. So he wasn't getting rid of any of that. And one area in that basement, we discovered all of that.
And it was his mother that turned him in, was it not?
His mom, I believe, had, she had some sort of inclination that something was up with him, but I think it was more along the lines of the robbery. But yeah, moms know, right?
Okay.
Moms know. And she knew there was something up with him.
Just on a final note as we before we finish off, do you have any advice for somebody who may want to follow a similar career path, become a detective working homicide or sex crimes?
Yeah, well, you need to get involved in investigations because you don't just go from a new detective investigating a divisional crime and then to the most serious crime on the book. So you need to get as much experience as you can. And then if you get the opportunity as a young constable to work with an experienced homicide team, even if you volunteer to go down and work with that team, you will see firsthand how things go. And that experience in and of itself is it's valuable. And even attending a press conference and watching homicide detectives present at a press conference, you can learn so much. My big thing, before we go here, my big thing too was interviewing these suspects. I was trained in statement analysis as well.
Hmm.
So that was part of what I did, was trying to get confessions from these suspects. That's way down the road. You want to get in the door, get as much experience as you can, and just soak it all in, watch and learn.